Now, we had General Bob Livingston on our show on Monday. He's the Adjutant General presently in South Carolina. And this is a race that's sort of odd for the United States, but not odd in South Carolina. In the United States, the other 49 adjutant generals are appointed by the governor or some official in elected status. In our state, we actually elect this position. So I started with General Livingston by just simply asking him what the adjutant general does. Here's what he said. Well, cut 3 here. If it's not playing, that's fine. We'll move on. I'll move along to my guest here, who is running against Bob Livingston, the Adjutant General in South Carolina, William J. Breazeale. He's a Republican. He is presently a lieutenant, or has been a lieutenant colonel in the military, Assistant Brigade S3, the Army Reserves, and he wants to replace General Livingston for the post. Good morning, sir.
Hey, good morning. It's actually James Breazeale, and that's how I listed on the ballot.
Okay, so William J. Breazeale, your legal name, but you go by James.
Right. I got tired of people saying Will Breazeale and thinking my first name was Wilbur and last name was Zeal. So got to make it easy for the voters, and so my name is James Breazeale, and I'm currently a lieutenant colonel in the Army Reserve.
Okay.
And I have been a battalion commander, which is one of the requirements that Bob Livingston's trying to get through to make this position appointed instead of elected.
Well, let's talk about that, because one of the things that I had heard before I had General Livingston on is that he believes that you wouldn't be considered a general if you were, elected to the post. But more importantly, your ability to serve. And let me just play a bit of audio of what he said, and then I'll have you respond to this. Here we go.
Well, I think there's 3 things that it would mean. First off, you have someone attempting to run an agency that is so critical in our national defense and so critical to the safety of the people of South Carolina that he would not be able to make proper judgments based on experience. He would have to listen to staffs, and we all know that staff sometimes may take you down the wrong road. The second thing is the being able to care for soldiers and airmen and families. I was a senior commander in Afghanistan, commanded over 9,000 people from 18 different countries. I understand how to deal with combat situations at a senior level. And then the third thing is he'd have to wear a suit to Washington, and quite frankly, if you're not a major general and you're dealing with the Pentagon or you're dealing with the Secretary of Defense or Congress, they don't take you serious unless you have that actual rank of Major General.
All right, Mr. Breazeale, your response to all that, I'll let you unpack it however you see fit.
Okay. Well, Nikki Haley is the commander-in-chief of the South Carolina National Guard, and she hadn't served one day in uniform, and she commands respect when she goes places. So, all a rank is, it's a sign of seniority. In South Carolina, we're not too fond of unions, and so we don't believe in seniority system. We believe in merit system and experience system, and all that means is that Bob Livingston's been in forever. That's why he moved up to Major General. I, on the other hand, have 3 times the combat experience that Bob Livingston has at senior levels. In Iraq, I trained the Iraqi army. I just didn't command joint service troops. I trained a foreign army and certified thousands of their troops. And in doing so, I met with the Secretary of Defense of Iraq, which I'm sure he never met with that high level, and convinced him to use Iraq's oil money to pay for their expenses instead of our tax money. It saved our taxpayers $40 million. And so that's different experience that he never had. When it comes to caring for families, of course I can make decisions. Look, I'm an airline pilot. I'm a captain of a Boeing 737. I make more decisions every day than Bob Livingston makes in a week that are vital to life and death.
Let me clarify that. You work for AirTran presently as a pilot, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, all right. I that was one other accolade you had on your resume I did not point out at the beginning. So in your view, let's go this way, because I think there's two ways to cover this race. Number one, what is the race for a lot of South Carolinians? And number two, who are the candidates? We're doing that, obviously. But the first question is, in your view, why is this important to the residents of South Carolina, since it is an elected post, to make sure they get it right as voters? What does it mean to them?
Well, my father, I live in Florence. My father lives in Mount Pleasant. He's an adjunct faculty member for College of Charleston. I lived through Hugo, and even in Florence it was scary. I'm sure it was even scarier in Charleston. And let me tell you one thing that, obviously I'm not running against Bob Livingston. I'm running for the people of South Carolina. He just happens to be my opponent. On the other hand, he has made some bad decisions. One of them is, think if you're downtown Charleston on Meeting Street, and you're surrounded by floodwaters. Everybody remembers those pictures from Katrina, and you want to get rescued, and the air is the only way to rescue you. Bob Livingston wants to turn down 28 Black Hawk helicopters that the active duty Army is trying to give South Carolina. Currently, we only have the 28 Apache attack helicopters. The Apache helicopter is a two-seat attack helicopter that cannot carry anybody off the top of a building, but he wants to keep it because he wants to say he has a neat toy of combat power. Meanwhile, it would save federal taxpayers $6 billion a year if they brought those Apaches to federal service. And guess what? It would save some lives on coastal South Carolina if we picked up people with a 15-passenger Black Hawk helicopter. It's just one example where I think he's made the wrong decision talking about saving lives.
To clarify for the folks, I mean, the Adjutant General of South Carolina is over the National Guard, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
We're over the Air and Army National Guard, and the Youth Challenge and AmeriCorps, and also the emergency manager for the state, as we saw in Georgia. And I was stuck in that ice storm. I think Nikki Haley's brother was also stuck in that ice storm.
Yeah, she wasn't happy about that, I heard.
Yeah. Well, it was terrible, let me tell you.
Her folks here in South Carolina certainly did a better job, I think, of handling this as best we could. We're not as experienced in ice storms, but I guess the bigger problem that we are unfortunately experienced in is perhaps hurricanes. And so if there was a hurricane, there was flooding, there are people trapped. It is the Adjutant General that presides over that rescue operation. Is that correct?
That's correct. As soon as the governor declares a state of emergency, she turns to me, if I were in that office, and says, "All right, Breazeale, make it happen." And I have to have a plan in place. That's another thing. Emergencies are never rehearsed. A plan looks good on paper, but until you rehearse it constantly, it won't work. It'll brief well, but it won't work well. And look, I'm uniquely qualified as well because we have a squadron of F-16 fighters under the Air Guard. And I'm the first Adjutant General to ever run in South Carolina, or candidate for Adjutant General to ever run, that's uniquely qualified to oversee the air and the ground. I'm combat arms on the ground, but also I'm a pilot with 10,000 flight hours. So I understand the air piece as well.
We're talking to James Breazeale. He is running for Adjutant General of South Carolina against our present General Bob Livingston. Let's talk about something that I also spoke with General Livingston about, which is the post-traumatic stress disorder. This is an important topic to me, and I know it is to the listeners as well, that we have a lot of people coming back from Iraq, Afghanistan, around the world, and they're coming back with post-traumatic stress disorder. 900,000 are suffering, if I can get it out, from some mental condition. How do you see that mess and the role you would play if elected Adjutant General?
Well, look, unfortunately, Brian, I saw it way too close. A soldier in our unit with no notice, obviously with no note or no threat, committed suicide in Iraq. I won't say his name to protect his identity, but I'll never forget it because while I was walking to see my general in his office, he called me and said, "You have been assigned as an investigating officer for a suicide." And I had to immediately go investigate the death and investigate why this soldier did it. And that's something else I have way more experience than Bob Livingston at, because I've actually investigated a suicide, and we do have an epidemic of suicides throughout the military. Two things I recommended to the Secretary of the Army in my report. One, we got to get rid of archaic HIPAA laws. Believe it or not, that soldier who committed suicide was still being sent out on patrol, on combat patrol, even though he was prescribed a mind-altering drug like Prozac and refused to take the prescription. But the psychiatrist was forbidden by HIPAA laws from letting his commander know. Wow. So our archaic laws, sir, contributed to that soldier's death, because I'm sure his commander would not have sent him on patrols. Two, the Army has a system when you suspect a soldier has PTSD or is troubled, and 1 out of every 5 soldiers coming back from overseas deployment do have some symptoms of PTSD. We do a check the block system. It's called ACE, Ask, Care, Escort. Well, if you ask a soldier if they're suicidal and they say no, then we've checked the block and we go, okay, we did our job. Why would you believe somebody who just lost 40 pounds in 2 months if they said they were not suicidal? We have to do more, and it's very passionate to me because I personally experienced this with a soldier in my unit committing suicide.
Yeah, it bothers me. There has been a bill introduced, I can't remember by which legislature at the House in Washington, D.C., to try to do something for the nearly 1 million servicemen and women who are facing post-traumatic stress disorder. And I think we all need to stop and think about that and reassure our congressmen and senators that we do want action taken to take care of these folks that are keeping us safe in the greatest country in the world. Now, we're talking to James Breazeale. He's running for Adjutant General, South Carolina, against the current General Bob Livingston. You're probably familiar with the Fitz News hit piece that was put out on you here recently, I'm assuming.
Yes.
Okay.
Obviously, that's, in my opinion, somebody from Bob Livingston. In fact, Bob Livingston's camp is associated with the people that put that out, and it's dirty South Carolina politics, and all I am is a concerned citizen trying to run to be the next Adjutant General of South Carolina. Look, if I'm elected to this position, I'm going to take $100,000 a year pay cut from what I normally pay as an airline pilot.
By the way,
I'm doing it because I care.
We've had a couple of callers call in while we've been on the phone asking what party, and I said that right at the beginning. If they're just joining us, a Republican Party, and this election is June the 10th, I believe. Am I correct there?
Right, and a lot of South Carolinians need to realize this as I've campaigned around the state. Look, Democrats have little or no chance of winning statewide in South Carolina. And so the election really is for statewide offices like this one, June 10th. If you wait till the general election, it's over. A Democrat didn't even file for this office. So you have 2 Republicans, myself and Livingston, running in the primary.
Let me go back to this hit piece real quick. I want to get you on the record on your position. Let me just read a couple of quotes from here from Seminole County, Florida. This was, let me make sure I get the dates right. I think there's a 1994 divorce with your first wife, Cheryl, and you were accused of aggravated stalking in connection with their relationship. And they said that you said, "I'll blow your expletive head off," and quote, "I'll shoot every damn one of you and ain't nobody going to stop me," end quote. And then I think that was from 1994. And then you have a restraining order in November 2012. Didn't abide by that injunction. Again, I'm just reading from Fitz News. Making public displays in her presence following her. It's what it says. Is that all untrue, or what is the?
Look, if 1/1,000,000th of that were true, I would not be an officer in the United States Army Reserve today, serving today. And I would not be flying aircraft all over the United States.
So divorces get nasty. What you're saying is that they've made those accusations and they have not been proven in a court of law. Is that the case?
That's correct. I've never been convicted of anything in a court of law. Look, 75% of soldiers. The Army has a 75% divorce rate. I have been divorced twice. I hate it. I just graduated with my master's in seminary in 2012 from Liberty University. I'm a follower of God, and today is a special day, obviously, being Good Friday. Nobody wants divorce. I didn't want divorce, but deploying 3 times like I did put huge strain on the marriages. I tried, and I hate it. They didn't work. And in the process, I do have a 21-year-old daughter. In the process of a custody battle, I wouldn't call it a custody battle, but in deciding custody, some ridiculous accusations were made by the ex-wife, and none were ever proven true. So therefore, I continue serving today. as a colonel in the Army Reserve.
James Breazeale for Adjutant General, South Carolina. I'd love to have both of you on, either phone or in person at the same time, do sort of a debate as we get closer to the June 10 primary, but I definitely want you and General Livingston back on. This is an important position for the security of South Carolinians, and I want to give the voters enough to make sure they'll make the right decision. You'll come back, right?
Well, yes, and I did meet with General Livingston one-on-one in his office about 3 weeks ago before I filed to try to work out policy differences before I filed, and we had enough differences that prompted me to file for this position. The voters make the decision, and I did challenge him to 5 debates, and he accepted my challenge, and we need outlets like yours to step forward, frankly, and organize these debates. Because the statewide Republican Party is not doing it. Let's face it, you got 2 juicy races going on. You got U.S. Senate and State Superintendent of Education, which are most of the forums. So we need organizations and stations like yours to step forward and organize debates. Interestingly, I've also challenged General Livingston to a physical fitness test. In the military, we have to pass that every 6 months. This is the only elected position in the United States that you have to pass a physical fitness test to hold the position. I don't think he can pass it, but we'll see. And I've challenged him to it, and so far he's refused to take my challenge. Because if you don't pass it, how can you look at those 11,000 soldiers and airmen and hold them to a standard if you can't pass it? So this will be interesting.
James Breazeale, thank you for joining us.
All right. Thank you, sir. Have a great day.
Great day.